Joining me now is criminal defense attorney Brian Claypool. Brian, welcome.
Hi, Mike. Great to see you again.
Thanks for doing this. Let's start with this trial by ambush claim by the defense. What do you make of it?
Well, look, in a criminal proceeding, the prosecutor has to share all the evidence with the defense. That's not the same in a civil case. So his lawyers make a great point. The prosecutors have to turn over the evidence because they need to allow the defense, for example, to hire expert witnesses to refute it. And if the prosecution hasn't turned over the evidence, it can lead to two things. A, it could lead to the charges potentially being dropped. And secondly, it could also lead to what's called an appeal. Prosecutors, Mike, always want to be turning over the evidence to avoid something like this that could lead to an appeal after the verdict, because that's a waste of taxpayer money.
The South Carolina Attorney General responds to a defense motion asking to release evidence against Alex Murdaugh. Quote, Murdaugh's motion is unfortunately a not unexpected but completely blatant attempt to create drama where formerly there was none. How do you assess that point, Brian?
Yeah, I think the prosecutors don't have good traction here with these comments, Mike. Here's why. This case is going to center on forensic testing, right? Prosecution's got to prove two things. Murdaugh was there, right? You're going to have GPS evidence. You're going to have his watch, for example, his phone. Prosecution's got to turn all that over. Secondly, most important, the testing done, the blood spatter testing on the clothing of Murdaugh. And here's another thing. Was there testing done for soot and stippling? That's that black, dark powder that emanates from combustion when you have an up-close shooting. That can prove two things. A, that Murdaugh shot the weapon, and B, it was close range. Because how else is the prosecution going to prove that Murdaugh shot the weapon? We're missing one weapon. There were two weapons used. They have one. What if there's no fingerprints of Murdaugh's on that weapon? So we need to see that testing for soot and stippling. That would be on his clothing, and that would certainly put Murdaugh at the scene of the crime.
Brian, based on what we know, should this be an easy case for the prosecution, and what should the defense do?
Yeah, Mike, this is not an easy case for the prosecution. Now, the optics, when you and I talk about it, oh, there's 30 charges. No, more than 30. I think there's more than 80, right? Yeah. They've added a bunch of financial fraud charges, probably close to 100 charges. So the optics to you and me look like, wow, this is a slam dunk. But this is not a slam dunk. And the reason why is for what I just said, that they've got to prove Murdaugh was there at the time. The time of death was 9 o'clock. He says, I didn't get there till 9:30. How do you prove he's there? GPS? His phone, maybe. Then you got to prove he shot both weapons, right? Do you have fingerprints from both? So that's going to be challenging. And one other quick point, Mike, I think prosecutors are overcharging with all of these financial crimes. Why? Because if he's convicted of all of the financial fraud crimes, he can go to jail for 100 years. Why is that important? Because if they don't get a guilty verdict on the murder charges, they still send him to jail for the rest of his life.
Interesting. Is it your sense, when you consider the financial crime charges and also the allegations, charges of killing his wife and son, that this guy's life was unraveling?
Yeah, there's no question about it. I mean, the prosecutors also have evidence of him being involved in a drug ring, that he was dealing drugs and channeling money through different bank accounts to divert tracing back to the drugs. He had this feigned suicide attempt that was a scam. He stole money for years from clients. Mike, he'd settle cases. He was a lawyer. He'd settle cases for clients and then steal that money. That is poster child evidence of a drug addict, right? That's somebody who's on drugs, who's trying to pay for drugs and cover their trouble. So this guy was unraveling for years. The question you and I probably have to ask is, like, how did this not get picked up years ago? How did this law firm not see it? I mean, that's for another day, but there were red flags everywhere that this guy was a train wreck.
Criminal defense attorney Brian Claypool, thanks so much for your time and your analysis today.
You bet. Thanks for having me, Mike.
Actor Gary Busey now facing sex offense charges after attending a convention in New Jersey. The details after the break.
It's the all-new Subway Series menu. 12 irresistible new subs.